Prologue. Sometimes I think the most terrifying stories never made it into newspapers, not because they were rumors or inventions. On the contrary, because they carried too much truth, too many details capable of shattering the way we think the world works. Every time I open old archives, I feel the same sensation. There are things inside those folders that no one was ever meant to read. Paper yellowed with age, lines written in trembling hands, signatures of strangers long gone. They smell of dust, but also of fear. It was the same the day I first encountered the name of the Lucio family, an officially closed case from 1987 in the small town of San Pablo Apatlaco in the state of Tlaxcala. No headlines, no scandal, just 3 children who disappeared from their own home in the middle of the night and returned 11 days later. But the deeper I went into the files, the clearer it became. What came back to the Lucio house may not have been their children at all. Chapter 1. The family in the town San Pablo Apatlaco in 1987 was a place where life moved slowly. Narrow streets, houses of gray brick and faded red tile roofs. By day, the cries of street vendors, the smell of fried corn, the bark of restless dogs. By night, silence, broken only by the endless mechanical hum of the sugar mill. Half the men in town worked there, including the head of the Lucio family, Aurelio. Aurelio Lucio was a stern but respected man. Tall, broad-shouldered, his skin darkened by the sun, his hands scarred by heat and machine oil. He left the house before dawn and returned late at night, exhausted, but always asked his children how their day had gone. His wife, Marina, was the opposite, gentle, anxious, with a tired face and eyes that never seemed at rest. She rarely left the house, always tending to the children. Neighbors would say she always knew exactly where each of them was. The children were ordinary, and yet, in hindsight, perhaps not so ordinary. Anna, the eldest, 12 years old, quiet, drawn to books her teacher secretly lent her, dusty volumes no one else in the village cared to read. David, the middle child, 9 years old, restless, always running with friends through alleys, returning home with pockets full of stones, feathers, and crooked sticks, insisting they were treasures. Camilo, the youngest, 6 years old, silent, watchful. He drew constantly in his little notebooks, but his drawings rarely resembled anything recognizable. The Lucio family was loved. In the evenings, neighbors gathered outside their home. The children played in the yard. The adults exchanged gossip. It was a simple between 2:20 and 2:45 a.m., but eyewitness accounts blur the timeline as if the night itself was fractured. Don Pedro noticed the first strangeness. He swore the dogs were howling not in anger, but in terror. It wasn't barking, he said years later. It was a cry of fear. Our dogs are big. They never back down. But that night, they pressed themselves to the ground and howled. I've never heard that sound again. Other neighbors recalled a strange low hum in the air. Some compared it to a massive engine idling. Others said it was like a thunderstorm rolling close. A few women swore the glass in their windows trembled. And then the clocks. 2 households reported their wall clock stopped at exactly 2:32 a.m. and did not start again until dawn. Inside the Lucio house, everything was quiet. Marina later swore she had heard Anna whispering to her brothers before sleep. Around midnight, silence fell. After that, nothing. When Marina opened the bedroom door at 7:12 a.m., the scene seared itself into her memory. Beds perfectly made, pillows undisturbed, windows sealed, door intact, and the sand, 3 small circles of fine, dark grains, unlike any soil in the village. Neighbors rushed in within minutes. Don Pedro was first, then his wife, then others. They all remembered the same eerie detail. The room smelled of ozone, like the air after lightning. But there had been no storm that night. Aurelio immediately checked the locks and shutters. Everything was intact. If this was a kidnapping, he muttered, then it was done by people who walked through walls. The police arrived at 9 a.m. The inspection lasted 3 hours. The report was sterile, lifeless. No evidence of forced entry, no signs of struggle, children absent, anomalous sand samples of unknown origin. For Marina and Aurelio, it was not a report. It was the beginning of a nightmare. Chapter 3. The Search. The search began the same day. Fields, barns, wells, and riverbanks combed by police and volunteers. Aurelio himself trudged through the scrubland with officers. I shouted their names, he later said, but the silence was so heavy, even my echo didn't return. The press ran with the only narrative they understood. El Sol de Tlaxcala printed a short notice. In San Pablo Apatlaco, 3 children have gone missing. Locals suspect involvement of a criminal gang. But the villagers knew it was no ordinary abduction. There were no footprints, no broken locks, no ransom. Some swore they saw a flash in the night sky, like welding sparks. Others spoke of hearing voices. Doña Esperanza, a widow, was adamant. I heard them laughing. Children's laughter right against the wall of my house. But when I stepped outside, the street was empty. Police clung to their kidnapping theory. But as days passed, suspicion grew into whispers. Elders muttered about the puertas de arena, the sand doors, hidden thresholds said to exist in Tlaxcala's hills, places where people could vanish. By the 11th day, the search had stalled. The police had no leads, no explanations. And then, on the night of April 15th, something happened that no one has been able to explain. The children came back. Chapter 4. The Return. 11 days had passed. For the parents, those days stretched like one endless nightmare. Mornings filled with fragile hope, nights collapsing into despair. Marina hardly slept. She sat at the window, staring down the empty street, rising at every creak of the gate. Aurelio drank too much coffee and went out with the search parties. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking, yet he stubbornly walked the same paths as if the children were simply hiding somewhere close. And then, the night of April 14th to 15th. Around 3 in the morning, a call reached the Yaukemekan police station. On the other end, the trembling voice of the bus station guard. 3 children are sitting on the bench. They don't speak. They just stare at me. They say their names are Anna, Camilo, and Tomas Lucio. Officers arrived 20 minutes later. What they saw entered the official report, though that document was never made public. The children sat pressed against each other, arms wrapped over shoulders. Their clothes were spotless, as though freshly washed. Their faces pale, eyes wide open. Not one of them blinked. "Where were you?" one officer asked. Anna turned her head slowly and whispered, "We were waiting for the door to close." That single line was recorded in the protocol. No further questions were asked that night. When the parents arrived, Marina collapsed onto her children, holding them so tightly it looked as if she might break their bones. Aurelio stood frozen, only muttering again and again, "Where were you? Where were you?" But the children gave no answers. They simply looked at their parents and smiled. A strange, motionless smile, the same on all 3 faces. The police decided to take them for medical evaluation. Chapter 5. Medical Anomalies. The first to receive them was Nurse Lydia Suarez. She later admitted, "I was afraid to walk into that room. They gave off a silence that pressed down on you. They weren't speaking, but it felt like something was happening between them, as if a conversation was passing invisibly in the air." She began with routine checks. Pulse, steady, too steady, exactly 60 beats per minute, synchronized across all 3 children, like the ticking of one shared metronome. When she placed the stethoscope on Anna's chest, the metal froze against her hand, as if pulled straight from an icebox. Suarez flinched, but the girl sat motionless. Camilo's eyes followed his sister's every breath. When Anna sighed, he squeezed his own eyes shut, as though the act had happened to him instead. Next came the pupils. Doctors shone a flashlight into each child's eyes. All 3 reacted in unison. Even if the light touched only one face, the other's pupils contracted and dilated simultaneously. The most disturbing discovery came later. Behind the right ear of each child, a small round scar, 1 centimeter wide. The skin around it was pale, almost burned. The official report stated blandly, "No evidence of surgical intervention. Scars identical in shape, origin unknown." But Suarez remembered differently. "I couldn't look away. The marks seemed to pulse, almost imperceptibly. I thought it was fatigue, a trick of the light. But when I turned away, I felt dizzy." There were other strangenesses. When the doctor asked Anna a question, it was Camilo who replied. Yet Anna's lips moved at the same time, perfectly synced, but producing no sound. Tomas, meanwhile, closed his eyes, as if he were seeing the words instead of hearing them. It was as if speech was traveling through all 3 of them, Suarez later said, not as individuals, but as parts of a single extended questioning of the children, no contact with the press, no additional paperwork beyond the official narrative. Missing, found. The sergeant tried at one point to raise the inconsistencies, the children's strange demeanor, their unnatural calm, the fact that they seemed to respond to questions in synchronization. But one of the men merely stared at him until he fell silent. Ramirez said, "It wasn't the look of a man. It was the look of someone who had already calculated what you were going to say and decided you weren't important enough to interrupt." Later, in the dusty archives of the state, a single unmarked sheet remained. It bore no seal, no signature, only typewritten text. Classification: coherent subjects, Category 2. A. Recommendation: passive observation. Direct intervention: undesirable. Researchers decades later would uncover an obscure glossary used within SISEN, the Mexican Intelligence Service. Buried deep in its terminology was a chilling definition: coherent subject, a biological entity demonstrating anomalous synchronization of physiological and behavioral processes, suggesting the existence of a collective or distributed consciousness. That was how the Lucio children were now regarded, not as three siblings, not even as individuals, but as one entity in three bodies. Rumors spread in whispers. Some said the men in gray remained in the village for weeks, watching the house from a discreet distance, driving unmarked cars at night. Others claimed that the family's phone line was tapped and that every visitor to their home was quietly logged. And yet, no open action was ever taken. The children were left where they were. The intelligence service, for reasons of its own, chose not to interfere, only to watch. But watching is not the same as understanding. Aurelio tried to joke. "Well, you really do live in unison, don't you?" But every time he said it, the children exchanged a glance and answered in perfect unison, "We are one." Teachers report. 2 months after their return, Senora Jimenez filed a report with the municipal authorities. The students display an unusual capacity for synchronization of actions and knowledge. It appears they share access to the same information. Behaviorally, however, they remain distant and interact little with other children. Among their peers, they provoke fear and confusion. This document later vanished from the school archives, though a copy remained with the teacher herself. End of the chapter. As time passed, the adults of the village became increasingly certain. These were not the same children who had left the house that April night. They had returned looking familiar, but they were not the same, and gradually the village began to distance itself from them. Chapter 8. The Empty House. Months passed. The children lived as if normally. School, lessons, household chores. Yet the village remained wary of them. Even neighbors who had once dropped by Marina's house for salt or to help with laundry stopped crossing the threshold. People were afraid. At first, it showed in small ways. Neighborhood children refused to play with Ana, Camilo, and Thomas. Those who dared would return home crying. One boy told his mother, "When I look at them, I see 3. But when I turn away, I know they are 1." Adults tried to dismiss it, but a sense grew within the village. Something had settled in the Lucio house that had no right to live among humans. The last fair. In the summer of 1988, Tlaxcala held its traditional fair. The Lucio family attended as a complete unit: Aurelio, Marina, and the children. It seemed they wanted to show they were just like everyone else. But soon, something happened that dozens of witnesses would never forget. The fair had a hall of laughter, a labyrinth of warped mirrors. Anna, Camilo, and Thomas entered together. 5 minutes passed, 10, 15. People began to worry. Adults entered the maze to find the children. They discovered them standing in the center, perfectly still. They were staring into a mirror, yet their reflections did not move in sync with their bodies. At first, people thought it was a glass illusion. Then, Anna smiled, and all three reflections smiled in slightly different timings, as if they were separate entities. A woman working at the fair recalled, "I saw their faces reflected separately, but the eyes were the same eyes on three faces." After that incident, the Lucio family never attended public celebrations again. The night of disappearance. In February 1989, the village awoke to a strange, low hum. Witnesses described it differently. Some said it sounded like the wind, others like someone whispering through a massive pipe. By morning, the Lucio house stood empty. The door was open, belongings neatly arranged, as if the family had planned to leave. But on the kitchen table lay 3 identical spiral drawings. In the living room mirror were tiny handprints, but each hand had 6 fingers. On the bedroom floor, a piece of paper in childish handwriting read, "We are returning to where we are awaited." Neighbors called the police. The investigation yielded no results. No car had departed. No footsteps were heard at night. The house seemed to exhale and then remain empty. A month later, the municipality sealed the house. Locals avoided it. I saw them again in 2019 at the market in Puebla. They looked older, of course, but I recognized them instantly. They were walking together, 3 of them, just like before. One spoke, another blinked. I shouted their names, but they didn't even turn. They only smiled. And then I realized they knew I had recognized them, and they knew I shouldn't have. Theories. Today, the Lucio case is debated among paranormal researchers. Several theories attempt to explain the impossible. Cloning, the idea that someone secretly conducted experiments on the children, creating replicas or altered versions. Cognitive virus, a consciousness capable of copying itself across multiple bodies, a shared awareness that defies biology. Mimetics, entities that imitate humans perfectly, yet are not truly human. But the most disturbing theory is the one that whispers in the back of every researcher's mind. They never really disappeared. They are among us. We simply don't know how to recognize them. Each theory chills the blood, but none fully accounts for the memories, the synchronized behavior, or the strange markings and drawings left behind. Epilogue. The Lucio house in Tlaxcala still stands, abandoned and silent. The windows are boarded, the doors rotted and warped. The house seems to breathe in the wind, exhaling decades of unanswered questions. Yet, on certain nights, local teenagers dare to trespass. Those who do report the same experiences, almost word for word. Inside, the air carries the sharp metallic tang here, hiding in plain sight.